Rafizi Ramli's vision for the implementation of the progressive wage policy could entail making annual salary increments mandatory. As the Economy Minister prepares to present the wage model to the National Economic Action Council next week, Benedict Weerasena from Bait Al Amanah shares why the idea could bring unintended consequences.
Forcing higher wages by law, it will lead to unintended consequences. For example, companies might decide to change employment policies from permanent staff who would be under the progressive wage model into contract staff instead, so they do not need to be bound by this new plan. Perhaps companies would resort to hiring freelancers instead. A worst case scenario, it could possibly lead to retrenchment due to increasing labor costs or replacement of labor by capital-intensive models such as automation. And this will lead to an unintended consequence of higher unemployment instead. So I think there are many factors that need to be considered here when the government tries to force higher wages by law. We believe that wages should be an outcome of a negotiation, not an imposition, and this negotiation is based on skill sets and qualifications of the labor force.
Comparing with the progressive wage model system in Singapore, Benedict shares how Malaysia can implement its own system effectively.
First of all, it affects only about 3% of the labor force in Singapore. In Malaysia, it might have to cover over millions of people, perhaps 10 to 20%, because our economic system is much more dependent on those who would be under this progressive wage model system. So it might cost more, it might be harder to implement. Also, the second reason why the system and the context is different is that in Singapore, there is a tripartite system, a strong relationship and engagement between the union, the employer, and the government. I think in Malaysia, we need to strengthen our unions first before we embark on this progressive wage model. And I think that will ensure the effectiveness in the long run. The third difference is the compliance clause and licensing, which requires stringent enforcement. I think in Malaysia, we must ensure that this enforcement is done properly, or else it might lead to leakages and preferred vendors when it comes to the government enforcing a progressive wage model.
Benedict also highlights the importance of unionization of workers as other means to promote income growth in Malaysia. He said the act of collective bargaining through workers' unions is what pushes wage growth across many developed countries.
There needs to be a broader perspective, a broader approach to address this low-wage issue. I think the first thing that many have talked about is actually reducing the dependency on low-skilled foreign workers. And I want to highlight here that it's not just foreign workers per se, but it's especially undocumented foreign workers, which tend to distort the market. I think that is the issue, enforcement on undocumented foreign workers. Second of all, as I said earlier, I think it's important to encourage unionization of workers, the promotion of collective bargaining as a means to promote wage growth. We see across developed countries across the world, the strength of unions is really what pushes wage growth, not really government imposition. In the past few years during the pandemic, we saw increased and excessive government spending. It created unsustainable models of growth and drove inflationary pressures. Instead, what we need is really an economy that is driven by pro-business policies to propel investment. I think this will create high-skilled jobs, high-skilled job opportunities, more investments, and raise overall wages at the end of the day.